Hey, it's Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. And here we are again, we're talking about that U.S. History test. And keep in mind what we've always said about that test, it is the most important test because what it does is it sets you up to have a wonderful senior year because you'll have all this testing nonsense behind you. Today what we're going to do is we're going to pick up with lesson number 10, and it's going to be on the Civil Rights Movement, and it consists of Standard 11. Most people, when they think of the Civil Rights Movement, they think about African Americans, of course, and the fight for equal treatment, of course, and the end of discrimination. But when you look at the Civil Rights Movement, it encompasses so much more and so many more different people, where it's Native Americans, where it's disabled, where it is women. There are a lot of different groups, Chicanos or Mexican Americans. There are a lot of people, of course, that fall under this particular umbrella. What we'll do is we'll start by giving you a picture of, once again, of the test blueprint. And as we told you, the test blueprint tells you where the test items are going to come from. And the most important area that we see in terms of the numbers is going to be contemporary United States. That consists of standards 10, 11, and 12. And over the next couple of lessons, that's where we're going to be concentrating. So it's going to be very important that you pay some attention to these things and master the facts that come along with these items. U.S. History Standard 11, Civil Rights Movement, evaluate the impact of the Civil Rights Movement on social and political change in the United States. And keep in mind, we're not just talking about black folk, we're talking about all sorts of different people that may be marginalized people in the United States of America. All right, here are some of the pictures that or some of the images of the Civil Rights Movement. On the left over here, you see pictures of the Black Panther Party, and then over in the lower left, Betty Friedan, who's the lady second from the left, who wrote The Feminine Mystique, Dr. King, George H.W. Bush signing the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then Cesar Chavez, the leader of the Chicano movement. So what we're going to do, of course, is look at this particular standard and try to give you some insights in terms of what the Civil Rights Movement went to each one of these different groups. Separate but equal. In Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, the Supreme Court legitimized segregation, allowing the continuation of Jim Crow. Schools, public facilities, and transportation facilities could remain segregated, according to the Supreme Court, as long as everything was separate but equal. Southern states were allowing legal precedent to relegate blacks to second-class status as separate meant unequal. And we could show you that by, of course, just looking at some of the pictures that we gave you. The one I like to tell you is about, of course, is the water fountains. If you look at the water fountains, of course, the one on the left, the one that has the good cool water, of course, is for white Americans, and the one on the right over here is for our colored or African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement. So things were separate, but that didn't mean that they were equal. And that's what the whole idea about Plessy versus Ferguson was, to have separate but equal. But as you can see, there was nothing equal about that. Migrations. Exodusters left the South under the leadership of Benjamin Pap Singleton and went to Kansas to escape racism and gain land for farming after the Civil War. The Great Migration occurred from 1916 to 1970 as blacks left the South and went to the northern cities to work in factories and escape Jim Crow. Both migrations shifted the political and cultural landscapes of America. On the right, you see Benjamin Pap Singleton and one of the homes in Nicodemus, Kansas, where a lot of the Exodusters, of course, went to. All right, desegregation and civil rights. Once again, Plessy v. Ferguson gave us separate but equal. We're going to find that in 1954, the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall, an attorney for the NAACP, will argue the case, and it overturned Plessy v. Ferguson and ended the segregation of public schools, and it would set the precedent to end segregation of all public facilities. The actions of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, the NAACP, the SCLC, the NCCR, and other civil rights activists led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended discrimination based on race, religion, sex, creed, and national origin. And at no point did the Civil Rights Act say it was for black folks. It was for anybody that was marginalized and discriminated against. Here you see Elizabeth Eckford for the Little Rock Nine. She was one of the 9 African American students that were responsible for desegregating Central High School in Arkansas, in Little Rock, Arkansas. And you see on the right, you see the governor of Arkansas, Orville Wallace, who is protesting and denying them access to Central High School, Little Rock Central High School. Employment and housing discrimination. Affirmative action was passed to encourage businesses and schools to give equal access to minorities and women in hiring and education applications if they were receiving government funding. It was criticized for creating reverse discrimination and was deemed so by the Supreme Court in the case of Regents of the University of California versus Bakke. So what we did is we discovered that by creating affirmative action to end discrimination, we were doing just the opposite of what we were trying to do. So by creating affirmative action, what we did was created discrimination, of course, against white Americans. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited housing discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It was especially important to prevent redlining by banks and mortgage lenders, where some people, of course, would be denied loans or mortgages because of where they were trying to get a mortgage, and that in and of itself becomes a tremendous problem when it comes to minorities and their quest to have good, affordable housing. 15th Amendment. So we looked at the suffrage in America in terms of the right to vote. You know, if you were a free white landowner prior to the Civil War, there were some restrictions, but for the most part, if you were a free white landowner, you could, male white landowner, you could engage in suffrage or the right to vote. The 15th Amendment, following the Civil War, guaranteed black men the right to vote, which would be reduced by Jim Crow era initiatives like the poll tax, literacy test, and grandfather clause, yet they still, of course, had the right. It was limited. The 19th Amendment guaranteed women the right to vote. It won because of the efforts of Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul, Lucretia Mott, Carrie Chapman Catt, etc. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. It expanded the protections for minorities' voting rights. And in other words, what it was designed to do is to take away some of those Jim Crow era initiatives that restricted a minority's right to vote. The 24th Amendment ended the poll tax as an obstacle to voting. And then the final suffrage expansion was the 26th Amendment that gave 18-year-olds the right to vote. And it was a result of the Vietnam draft and the protest of Vietnam. If they're old enough to fight, go overseas, of course, and fight for the country, then they should be old enough, of course, to vote. And so you could be drafted at 18, so you should be able to vote at 18. The Chicano movement, the 1940s through the 1970s, the goal of the Chicano movement was to gain better education, respect for cultural heritage, labor rights, and equal treatment for veterans, and political representation for Mexican Americans. The Chicano movement patterned itself like the African American Civil Rights Movement and employed nonviolent protests like marches and nonviolent civil disobedience to achieve its goals. Leaders of the movement included Dolores Huerta, Hector P. Garcia, and Cesar Chavez. Native American civil rights, the American Indian movement started in 1968. It emulated the African American Civil Rights Movement and utilized civil disobedience to gain legal rights to address land claims, improve conditions in tribal lands, safeguard sovereignty, and end police brutality. The one thing about the American Indian movement is, just like the African American Civil Rights Movement, is they believed in civil disobedience, but in some cases, their protests from the American Indian movement in some cases led to violence. Disability rights movement from 1970s to 1980s, it advocated for the rights of disabled in housing, education, and employment. The movement advocated for equal access to accommodations for the disabled in public facilities. Section 504 of the Rehab Act of '73 passed to prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities in programs receiving federal funding. Education for all handicapped children in 1975 mandated that public schools provide a free and appropriate education to children with disabilities, which is still a very big deal in the United States of America today. And in 1990, that was signed by George H.W. Bush. The Americans with Disability Act prohibited discrimination based on disability in all public life sectors by requiring accessibility to public spaces, employment, and accessibility for disabled Americans. If you ever wonder why we have elevators in buildings, of course, that have more than one floor, it's because of ADA. If you ever wonder why we have ramps and we have disabled bathrooms for the handicapped, it's because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. LGBTQ plus civil rights. Now, once again, when we initially put that picture up there, we showed you all the groups, of course, that benefit from the civil rights movement and civil rights initiatives. One here that we're dealing with today, of course, also has those rights, those very same rights are being extended to some of our LGBTQ plus citizens. Some civil rights initiatives in present-day America center around LGBTQ plus citizens, particularly around marriage and military service. The Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009, signed by President Obama, expanded the funding to state and local authorities to investigate, arrest, and prosecute crimes against marginalized communities. Obergefell v. Hodges expanded same-sex marriage rights to declaring marriage unions in a state where same-sex marriage is legal must be recognized in other states in the United States of America. So in other words, if you get married as a same-sex person in one state that does have it legalized, when you cross into a state that doesn't recognize it legally, you still have to be recognized. You still, you will be recognized, of course, as having a legal union. Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Repeal Act of 2015 repealed the policy banning openly LGBTQ plus people from serving in the military. So when you look at these rights, we have to understand it started out, of course, with African Americans and the fight for civil rights, of course, but it expands over time and it goes up into this particular point where we are today. Now, once again, we have all the relevant facts and a fact list, of course, that deals with the civil rights movement. I would encourage you to go through and look at them. And once again, we'll just flick through a few of them so that you can see some of the things that you should be able to master. You're going to have to be able to read well to do okay on this test, but you're also going to have to know some facts. And what we try to do is give you a leg up by giving you some of these things that you, of course, can look at. Now, it is important to understand there's a lot of facts that you have to know here. And the easiest way, once again, as I keep harping on it, is to learn to create flashcards. This is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History, and we hope you pay some attention to this U.S. History review on the Civil Rights Movement. Just like the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement is a lot of information. And the easiest way to learn a lot of information fast is by using those flashcards. Once again, keep in mind that U.S. History test is the most important test because it's the gateway to you becoming a senior. Take the advice that we gave you, learn those facts, and you'll do just fine. And with that, we'll see you next time.